Hello, everyone, and welcome to Making Waves. It's the show where we interview spectacular individuals doing amazing things in a difficult world. I'm your host, Drew Leifheit. I'm a podcast consultant and voiceover artist. And today, on our LinkedIn Live session, the takeaways of a wise warrior. Our guest is Robin Horsfall, a decorated British military veteran whose varied and extraordinary life experiences have forged his distinctive voice and unique perspectives as a writer. Robin served in the Northern Ireland conflict, has been a bodyguard for global figures, and even founded a karate school, among other spectacular things he's done in his life. However, Robin Horsfall's biggest claim to fame was his role as a member of the UK's esteemed Special Air Service, SAS, counter-terrorist unit, which rescued 19 hostages from a foreign embassy in London in 1980. Robin's written several books, which reflect all of the spectacular things he's done in his life, and he's been extremely prolific and eloquent in communicating his insights about Russia's invasion of Ukraine, something we hope to speak about a little bit later in our conversation. Welcome, Robin Horsfall, to Making Waves, and thanks so much for being here. It's been a long time coming.
Nice to be here, Drew. I was a little bit ill over Christmas and before, so I'm in good shape now. Nice
Excellent.
To be here.
Excellent. Hope you're fit and ship shape. First of all, I admittedly was not able to read your entire book, but I read some excerpts from your book. And, I think it seems as if something that was very seminal in the kind of person that you became had to do with some very early experiences. The word bullying comes to mind. Maybe could you take us back a little bit and talk about how did Robin Horsfall become who he is?
Well, I didn't have a father until I was 7 years old. The father I did have was in prison, so he was a thief. So I had no experience of a male role model in my life until I was 7, when my mother married Jeffrey Horsfall, and he adopted me and gave me his name. And that first 7 years is absolutely vital in a young person's personal development. He'd never had children. I'd never had a father, and consequently we clashed. And his method of dealing with that was to beat me into silence if I answered back, if I had an opinion. And I've actually called that I've actually said that he stole my voice. If you beat someone into silence, then you take away their ability to negotiate, to laugh, to smile, to make friends, to include themselves in the lives of other people. And so consequently, that stunted my emotional development for a long time, and was it isolated me from my peers, made it very difficult for me to understand other people, to behave like a young man should, to josh, to laugh at myself, and so on. And those were struggles that it took me a long, long time to overcome. And it took me a long time to get my voice back. And I got my voice back when I was a young soldier by learning how to teach. I got it back. I love teaching. I love standing in front of a class. I love standing in front of an audience and imparting knowledge to them. That's a big part of getting my voice back when I'd lost it for so long. And I think an awful lot of people who are told to shut up, who are told to wait, who are told that they don't have an opinion, or who are forced into silence, need a place where they can express themselves. I did it in my books as well. So there's a lot there, a lot of stuff. And I write an awful lot of stuff about bullying. I'm involved with writing a thesis about bullying right now.
How instrumental was that in your decision to join the military?
I'm not sure. I think by the age of 14, my mother and father were divorcing, and my school life had gone down. I wasn't doing very well in life, so I decided that if I was going to be a failure, I was going to be an excellent failure. I wouldn't attend school. Things were going the wrong way. And then one day when I was 14, I walked into the Army Careers Information Office in Aldershot and volunteered to join the Army. Now, that sounds quite strange for somebody who's got a problem with authority figures, but it was my choice. I was giving somebody the authority to tell me what to do, whereas in my mind, I hadn't given Jeffrey Horsfall that authority, and I hadn't given the school teachers at school that authority. So here I was saying, yes, I'm going to sign a piece of paper. I'm going to get away from my dysfunctional home. I'm going to get away from my failures at school, and I'm going to start again. I think that was the biggest part of it. But when I went to join the Royal Army Medical Corps. I thought I would be a good medic, but they said I wasn't bright enough for that particular role. And but people can be right. You can change in time. But
Sure.
I ended up in the parachute regiment as a junior soldier at the age of 15, and I became a paratrooper at the age of 17 and a half. So I think it was a form of escape, a form of starting again more than anything else.
Mm-hmm. So in retrospect, how would you rate your decision?
Oh, I think it was one of the best things I ever did. I think I would have been a troubled, insecure, unhappy young man with no path in life and limited opportunities. The Army, at that time, there were 13,000 junior soldiers in the British Army, and they all were learning skills and trade and leadership skills. They weren't just learning how to be soldiers, and they were learning how to be engineers, medics, electrical experts, mechanics, you name it, the skills were there. So it was an engine which provided the middle classes of the future as well, the tradesmen, the skilled people of the future. It wasn't just about soldiering, but it also gave me mentors, good mentors and bad ones. It gave me people who inspired me to do well, people who understood me, people who gave me direction. So yes, it was a very, very positive thing to do.
Yeah, it sounds like it was a great decision for you. On a slight tangent, someone just made a comment, actually, who was also in the service in America, a very dear friend of mine, and he's spoken to me about the things that he's received back from that experience, the camaraderie, and just there seems to be some very good in those things. A lot of times people are disparaging about war and things, but and I think the military ends up getting caught up in that. But it's like a parallel society in many ways. No.
It's an institution. It's a family, or it used to be. For me, it was a place to belong to, especially in the British system, where you have regiments with different cap badges and different coloured berets, and everybody feels that their family is better than the other family. It makes you feel important and special, and you have a part in that, a special place in that, depending on how well you do. So the idea that soldiers are all victims, I don't like that idea at all, because for most soldiers, they look back on their military career as a positive experience. But the media do love to take this idea of a victim and make it into something it's not, so that the public get an image that every soldier who served is some kind of destroyed, damaged, vulnerable individual who was badly affected by his experiences with the military. I had a few bad experiences, and I talk about them occasionally, but in general, my experience was absolutely brilliant, and I don't regret any of it. It was something I did, something I'm very, very proud of, and something I'm glad I did.
Mm-hmm. Robin, okay, this is just my take. I don't know much about the Northern Ireland conflict, but obviously this is something where people feel very strong, or they felt very strong on either side, right? What was that like for you? How long was your involvement, and what was that like for you, or how do you see it now?
The Northern Ireland conflict is a complicated story that goes back almost 500 years. And ultimately, the divide between the people is a religious divide between Protestant and Catholics. And politicians gain their votes by maintaining the division between the two communities. Because without that division, they'd have to start talking about serious subjects like housing and jobs and so on. But they don't. They can gain their votes. I read about Northern Ireland when I was 18 as a soldier. When I was serving there, I read books by Leon Uris, Trinity, and the history of Northern Ireland and the complicated story. People around the world don't really understand that Northern Ireland was divided from the Republic of Ireland, back in the early 20th century by agreement of both sides. And the majority of the Protestant community went to Northern Ireland and remained part of the United Kingdom. When the soldiers went back there in 1969, they went back there because the two communities were entering into open battle with one another, and law and order had broken down. The soldiers had to stand between the two sides. Bad politics from the British government over the next 5 years actually led to a situation where the Republicans, the Catholic community, felt that the soldiers were on the other side, and so it became a vicious 30-year war, with the poor soldiers standing in the middle trying to prevent a civil war from erupting. There's huge amounts of propaganda that have gone around the world. People control the message. They spread their stories. There are people that think that they're still Irish, although they haven't been for hundreds of years, to live in foreign countries, that have heard these stories. But the poor soldier who's on the ground, stood between the two communities, gets shot at and attacked by both sides, has to stand in the middle and try to take the place of a policeman. It's an extremely difficult job to do. And, over 1,000 of the security forces were killed during that period of time. 29 of my personal friends, colleagues from my own regiment were killed during that time, 29 out of 600. I have sympathies for both sides and their story, but we were very much the neutral party in the middle, and people forget that, or don't even know it to start with. I did 5 tours of Northern Ireland, 5 active service tours there.
Wow.
Between 1975 and 1984.
Could you talk a little bit for us newbies out there? Could you talk a little bit about the Special Air Service? Maybe could you break that down for a Yank?
Yeah, the Special Air Service Regiment. There's only one regular unit, one full-time unit, and that's 22nd Special Air Service. To become part of it, during my time, you had to serve 3 years with the regular unit first, and then you could volunteer. And if you volunteered, nobody could be turned away. And everybody would turn up, and everybody would turn up and do the first month training in the Welsh Mountains. The last week was called Test Week, and you'd have 5 days where you do the equivalent of 5 marathons over the Welsh Mountains alone, carrying weights up to between 35 and 55 pounds on your back, with time limits. And if you succeeded in passing that, which I would say about 12% did, you then went on to continuation training. Continuation training was predominantly in the jungles around the world, and you lived in a 4 to 5 man patrol in the jungle for 4 or 5 weeks, where you were constantly tested there. You then went on to do combat survival training, and in the last week of the combat survival training instructor's course, you were put out on the ground alone or with a partner, and you got chased by 2 battalions of soldiers for a week, and you were captured at the end and interrogated for 24 hours. And if you passed that, you then went, if you weren't already a paratrooper, you went on to do basic parachute training.
Mhm.
And then you got your cap badge and joined your squadron on probation. And then in the next 6 months of probation, you do a personal skill and a troop skill. My troop skill was mountaineering, and my personal skill, I got back there in the end, was as a paramedic. And at the end of that year, you're then qualified, and you stay for another 2 years, total of 3. And then you're reassessed, and you can stay on for another 3 if they still like you, if you're still going forwards. And I did 2 3-year tours with them, and then I purchased my discharge and went on to other things.
Mm-hmm. What, becoming a part of that force, what was that like for you personally? How difficult?
Oh, it was extraordinarily difficult. I was one of the youngest on the group. I was 21 years old, and I passed just after my 22nd birthday. You're expected to do everything alone. You're selected as an individual, not as part of a team. You're never classed as failing. You just didn't make it. You go back to your old unit. So there's no shame in not passing. But I didn't want to go back. Just before I left, an old corporal in the clerk's office said that I'd be back with my tail between my legs because I was too young. Well, it took me 2 attempts, but I got there in the end. It was where I wanted to go. It was where I wanted to be. I think I'd been a victim of bullying as a young man, even as in my first years in the army, and I was driven by a deep-seated insecurity. I wanted to prove that I was as good as the next man, not necessarily better, but as good as. And that was. I think that was the driving force behind most of my achievements in life. To be fair.
At your lowest point, you have any recollection of what was going on in your mind
during the selection phase? I remember there's a march called Point to Point, which is 27 miles long. It was in the cold. It was about 15 below zero on the mountains. There was snow on the ground up to about 6-7 inches deep. And I'd started 10 hours earlier, and I was coming on the last leg. And I could see a soldier in front of me who was pretty much the strongest guy in the group still, called Andy. And Andy was going up the Roman road to the back of Penavan, which is the highest mountain in South Wales. And the climb to the top was extraordinarily steep. And I thought, if I can keep him in my sights as it gets dark, I'll be okay. I'll get there. And he disappeared over the top, and I was struggling to get to the top. I had 50 pounds on my back. And as I was going up, I was counting my steps. I was thinking, I'll count 50 steps and then stop. I'll count 50 steps and then stop. And by the time I got to the last climb, I was counting every 5 steps. 5 steps, stop. Can't keep going. Yes, you can. 5 steps, stop. And I finally got over the top. And when I got over the top in the dark, suddenly I was confronted by Andy with big bulging eyes. And in the dark, he'd almost stepped over the 1,000-foot drop on the other side. And we went down to the final checkpoint together. So that process of giving myself small targets and achieving them. So it started with 50 steps upwards, then it got down to 5 steps upwards, but I kept going and finally got to the top. That was one moment that was extremely difficult. There were lots, and they are in the selection period was particularly difficult. Only 8 of us passed, and the full story is in my book, Fighting Scared. I mean, the book's called Fighting Scared because in an earlier phase of my life, during that bullying period, I had a very bad experience where I almost got beaten to death, and I was determined that it would never happen again. And so I was always in trouble, and I was always fighting after that because I was so scared of getting that badly hurt again. And that's where the title comes from. Sat down and worked that one out with my wife.
Right. So how long then were you in this unit before you were called up for a very serious mission? Could you take us back a little bit? Tell us about that.
Yeah. Well, I started my selection phase in January 1979, the one I passed. And so I joined the squadron in the summer of 1979, joined the squadron just before Christmas in Northern Ireland. And in April 1980, it was our turn as a squadron to take over the counter-terrorist team, the Pagoda team. And 4 weeks later, a group of Arabistani terrorists took over the Iranian embassy in London and captured 23 hostages, of which by the time we did the assault, 20 were left inside. So it wasn't that you were selected for that team, it's that every squadron passed through that process once every 2 years, and it just happened to be our turn at that time. So we trained hard for it, we were ready for it. Every scenario had been practiced, whether it be a ship, whether it be an aircraft, whether it be a bus on the road. But in this particular case, it was a building with 54 rooms and 5 floors. And on May the 5th, 1980, after they murdered one of the hostages and threw him out the front door, we went in, we killed 5 terrorists, captured 1, and rescued, most importantly, rescued 19 people alive. So it's a very famous day in British history, and it was quite famous in American history as well, because only a week before they had attempted to make put a major operation into Iran to rescue their own hostages, and unfortunately it had gone wrong. So the world needed a big lift, and we gave it to them in no uncertain terms. And then we disappeared into obscurity. We were the most famous anonymous people in the world at that time. Yeah.
You know, when a lay person like myself hears something, a tale of this magnitude, of course, you know, the first thing that probably runs through a lot of people's minds is, oh, you know, is this like a scene in a movie? How much would it resemble that, or what, you know, what? How could you describe the mood of, you know, when you're given instructions and how everyone's reacting? It's put us in the
when you train as a special forces soldier, you train on the cutting edge of danger, and you also train on the cutting edge of physical extremes. And there are many reasons for that. Many people will have read Malcolm Gladwell, who wrote Blink and Tipping Point. And in one of those books, he actually talks about policemen that get it wrong and shoot the wrong people. And he says that the reason for that is that the brain can't make minor cognitive decisions when the heartbeat goes over 145 beats a minute. If you're running, if you're doing something physically strenuous, your heartbeat goes up. If you're frightened, your heartbeat goes up. If you're unfamiliar with circumstances, your heartbeat goes up. So by having people who are highly trained, who work close to danger during their training, and who are extremely fit, you can keep the heartbeat down. And if you keep the heartbeat down, then you can make minor cognitive decisions under extreme pressure, which is why we shot the right people in the right circumstances for the right reasons and rescued all the hostages. It was just like an exercise to us. It was something we practiced over and over and over again for exactly that kind of scenario. And when we did it, things did go wrong. Mistakes were made, but they were put right by the highly trained individuals on the ground at the time.
Mm-hmm. Is there maybe a specific action of yours that you know, you remember, or a feeling, or you know, what flashes in your mind about the whole day?
I think there's several things. I think what was going through my mind during the approach was, you make sure you do your job properly. Everybody's relying on you to do your job properly. That's all you have to be concerned about. What happens, happens. You know, you just have to do your job properly. That's your major concern. So you're not frightened. You may be a little bit anxious, but that anxiety comes from a fear of not doing what you're supposed to do well. There were moments when during the approach, the approach was compromised. Somebody put their foot through a window as they were abseiling down the back. So the go went early. and the guys had to rush up to the building, put the charges on the windows and go before they were absolutely 100% ready, which they did. On my approach point, which is the back door, we had to take the back door out with sledgehammers and go in. I can remember 3 rounds coming through a window upstairs above my head. The man who had put his foot through a window had got stuck on his abseil rope and above the window, and the curtains in the window below had caught fire. So he was burning above my head, and I looked up, watched him. There was nothing I could do about that. I just had to concentrate on my job, and the guys above him managed to cut him down, and he fell onto the balcony and carried on with burnt legs and did his job. There's lots and lots of small minor incidents and little pieces. I went into the building, rescued a police officer called Trevor Locke and took him out, passed him on to the next guy, the hostages coming down. And then finally, amongst the group of hostages, there was a noise. A terrorist had mingled amongst them. He had a hand grenade, and I shot him with a 3-round burst from about 5 meters away. The building was on fire. Everybody got out, and we went back into the building next door, which the Royal College of General Practitioners, and Willie Whitelaw came to see us, and he was the Home Secretary, and told us how great we were, and he had tears in his eyes, wanted to take us out into to be seen by the world's media. And our boss said no. We got into the back of a big yellow truck and disappeared away to Regent's Park Barracks anonymously, where we met Margaret Thatcher later in the day, and then went back to Hereford and got ready in case another incident happened the next day. The world was screaming everywhere about it, and we had to remain anonymous. We know locally people knew it was us, but nobody knew who we really were. In fact, the world had never heard of us before until that moment. It was the day the SAS became famous and the myth began.
What about how the terrorists themselves, what was their behavior like? Was it how one would imagine? Is it stereotypical, or are they? Is it different than one would imagine?
Well, they were young men who had been tricked by Saddam Hussein's government into believing that they were going to go in there, take over the embassy, make a statement, and then be diplomatically rescued and taken back to Iraq. Nothing could have been further from the truth. They were put in there, and then as the days passed, realized that this wasn't going to happen, and they were alone, became frustrated, and they finally, one of them, Faisal, actually murdered the charge d'affaires, and he was the person that I shot. One of the hostages was taken alive. That was Fauzi Najad, who spent 28 years in prison for his crimes. They were young men. They were men who had their own particular issue as a isolated minority in Iran. And looking back at the pictures of them, they were younger than me in many cases. They were just slightly older than me at the time, but they look so young now. But they murdered somebody. They took those hostages. They were responsible for their own actions. So there's a slight element of sadness in the fact that they had to die, but they created those circumstances. And it was a good day for the world. It was a good day for the SAS. But the most important thing is that we rescued 19 people. That's the thing. It's about the lives we saved, not the lives we took.
Right. Excellent. And I'd just like to remind everyone out there that you are watching Making Waves. Hello. And our guest today is Robin Horsfall. He's a wise warrior. He's written several books, and we're talking today with him about the great experiences he's had throughout his life. How seminal would you say that day is to who you became? Was this a big milestone for you?
No, I don't think it was seminal at all. I don't think it was. We regarded it as 15 minutes of glory. It was over. There were 50 of us that went into the building, and there were 6 of them. So we knew we were going to win. it was nowhere near as scary or frightening or as long as spending weeks walking the streets of Northern Ireland in the dark, waiting for someone to shoot you, waiting to have an IED, an improvised explosive device, go up and kill you. So nowhere near as frightening as flying down to the Falklands War and knowing that you're going to get involved in a full stage military combat. So no, it wasn't that. It wasn't that profound. It was, as I say, 15 minutes of glory.
Mm-hmm. What about that, Robin? You know, I wrote in a social media post promoting our talk today that, you know, I see your career and I feel as if, you know, you've kind of run directly into the eye of the storm. What is that like? Do you think that you seem to have a very calm demeanor? Was it? Does this become kind of a challenge? You know, to what can I do next, or how do you go about deciding what you want to do?
I think an awful lot of my life was led by my circumstances and skills. So I wasn't an adrenaline junkie who wanted to go out and be an adventurer and attack exciting things. I did exciting things because it was my job to do those things. When I left the army, I became a bodyguard and earned good money, but I got bored. And so I went off to be a soldier again because I needed to pay the bills, and they were the skills I had. It took a while. I mean, my British military service was 12 years, and I had about another 4 or 5 years of service with other armies. I was a major in the army of Frelimo in South Africa. I was a captain in the Sri Lankan armed forces, which I resigned from because they were committing genocide. I got around the world quite a lot, but predominantly my reasons for that was, there are my skills. These are the people who are prepared to pay me. I've got a mortgage. I've got a wife. I've got a growing family. I need to pay those bills. And so the adventures came along, not because I went out searching for them, but because that was my skill set, and that was where it sent me.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Here, I'm just going to refer to a couple of comments that we've received. Adrian Logan writes, that single act gave back Great Britain its confidence in the world. Well done, Robin, and the rest of the team. What do you think about that? Is that a true statement?
I think it was a big day for Britain. I think we'd suffered for a long period of time with recessions. We'd become the poor man of Europe, end of empire, and so on. We'd had mass unemployment in the UK. And it gave the nation a huge lift and said, look, we can do something special. We are people who have something to be proud of still. We can do something that everybody else can't do, which was absolutely true. After the Munich debacle with the Olympic Games, where the Israeli athletes got murdered, something needed to be done, and the British government invested in that for a long period of time, and trained us. And when the circumstances provided an opportunity for us, we were ready for it. It did give the British nation a huge lift, and it gave the world a huge lift, because everybody was struggling for something to fight back against terrorists with. Trains, planes, automobiles, you name it. They were hijacking and taking hostages and getting what they wanted. And for the first time, we took the game to them and defeated them. So it was a huge day in history. Yeah.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Here's another comment for you. This, unfortunately, we're not getting who the LinkedIn user is, which is odd. I'm not sure why this does this sometimes. Heroes run towards problems. How did what you may have experienced as a child contribute to your actions as an adult?
Yeah, that's quite a deep question. We're all built on our own foundations, the foundations that our parents provide, the home life, our socioeconomic conditions, our achievements and our failures. we all build on those. We all come to become the person we are. I think if I had to say something that was quite concise about that, it would be never let people get you down. Believe in yourself. There's a world full of people who are underachievers telling you can't do something. You'll never be able to do something. And so you don't try. And the important thing is to go out there and put yourself in the game and try. Don't be a bit part player in somebody else's theatre show. Make it your show. And it's amazing what people can achieve. I spent 25 years of my life teaching children martial arts, and I had high standards. And I would say almost all of those children achieved far higher standards than they ever thought they could, because I believed in them and told them not to listen to the naysayers.
Excellent. Those are great words. I'm curious, Robin. If you think about some of the difficult, sorry, I muted my. If you think about some of the difficult things that you've been through in your career, how do you think this translates into other aspects of life, whether it be, business or family? I know you think a lot about these things, right?
Yeah, I mean, life is life. I mean, I think the Buddhists say life is suffering, and our achievements in life are about overcoming adversity. I think you've just muted me.
Yeah, sorry about that.
Yeah. About overcoming adversity. Life's achievements are about overcoming adversity. Most of our life we spend in neutral. We're neither sad or happy. We're just getting on with life. We're eating our dinner. We're not eating our dinner and thinking, "Oh God, this is making me so happy," or "This is bad food. I'm miserable." You just get on with life, and then occasionally you have moments of happiness, and occasionally you have moments of unhappiness. And people who want to be happy all the time are always going to be disappointed. And people who are miserable all the time are going to make everybody else miserable. I just get on with life and take each step as it comes. Overcoming adversity is what makes me feel. Overcoming struggle, achieving is what makes me feel good about myself. It doesn't matter how small those tasks are. Sometimes you've got half a dozen do-it-yourself jobs in the house. There's a picture that needs hanging. There's a yard that needs sweeping. There's a wall that needs painting. So I write a list and I work my way through them. Little items, one thing at a time. Small achievements lead to much bigger achievements.
Right. Here we have another LinkedIn participant who is curious about your experience as a bodyguard. You mentioned it earlier. Could you maybe talk about it a little bit more?
Yeah, I was the bodyguard for several important people. Started off with Muhammad al-Fayed and his son Dodi Fayed, who died with Princess Diana in a car crash, and eventually ended up with Rafiq Hariri, who became the Prime Minister of Lebanon, which was one of the most high-profile and important jobs with a genuine threat that I ever had. Bodyguarding is a job that requires training. It also requires an awful lot of administrative work and planning. And if it's done really well, nothing happens. So if nothing happens, then the client thinks that he doesn't need you anymore. And so he reduces the cost or he reduces the standard. And then something does happen. It's a catch-22, a difficult place. The biggest enemy of bodyguard is complacency. And in jobs where I got bored, I left because I knew that I wasn't paying attention anymore. It isn't about big, powerful, strong guys. It's about qualified, skilled people who know how to deter, detect, and if they don't get those two things right, react to a situation and escape with the client. The main job of the principal bodyguard is to get the client away, run away with him from danger, not to stand there and fight. When you talk, people sometimes talk about bodyguards as people who look after celebrities, but they're really big, powerful guys who are just there to keep the crowd away and to make sure the person doesn't get crushed. They're not necessarily there to stop people getting blown up, murdered, blown to pieces by suicide bombers and so on. They're just blockers. And that's not demeaning to them because they do an important job, but it's a different job.
Mm-hmm. Were you, did you experience some dodgy situations where you could tell that, maybe there were some evildoers in the nearby?
No, I think we did our planning and administration so well that we never got into that situation. There were occasions when I'd be walking the streets of Paris with Rafik, and there would be me as the bodyguard in the center if it was my turn, and the cordon group around the outside on the Champs-Élysées, for example, where a lot of people, a lot of Lebanese people would come and recognize them and come and speak to them. And you had to sort of block those people from walking straight up to him and make sure that it was safe. And that's you have to have a sense of what's going on around you, how people are behaving out of the ordinary. People in the Secret Service in the USA, when they're watching crowds, they're not watching the whole crowd. They're looking for the person that's out of sync with the rest of the crowd, whose body language, whose behavior is slightly different, who's not looking where everybody else is looking. So you see the discolored bird in the flock of white geese, so to speak. So it's a skill. It takes time. It takes practice. It takes concentration. There's a scene in the Kevin Costner Whitney Houston film where he's called The Bodyguard, and I thought it was one of the most realistic points in the film, where he walks in and she says, "My God, you don't look like a bodyguard." And that was absolutely true, because in reality, he did. They're not big mountainous guys. They're usually ordinary looking guys, gray men, standing just off to the side of the client, ready to step in at a moment's notice.
Excellent. So I just wanted to give a little bit of backstory, why I sought you out in the first place to have this wonderful conversation. For those, I think probably almost everyone who's listening now has probably read one of Robin's very provocative and thought-provoking posts on LinkedIn, since February, right?
Yeah.
When the Russian invasion began.
Yeah.
And so I'm just curious, Robin, if you could talk a little bit about that. What spurred your interest, or how did this come about that you felt compelled to write such amazing material on this tragedy in Europe?
Well, my main role in life now is as a writer and a public speaker, and I like blogging on LinkedIn because there's no monetization to it. There's no editorial control apart from bad behavior and bad language and threats. And I thought it was I was quite enjoying putting up little posts on that about the stuff that I usually write. But then I saw what was going on the Ukrainian border and the Russian mobilization of troops, and how they put 100,000 of their own troops north of Kyiv. And I started writing about it out of frustration, because I could see exactly what was going on. And the British media were talking about Boris's Christmas party, and the Australians were talking about Djokovic getting kicked out of the country, and the Americans were talking about number 45 as usual. And nobody in the world's media was talking about this huge buildup of troops. And it was fairly obvious to me that they were going to damn well invade the country and walk in, just like they walked into Hungary and Czechoslovakia. And so I started to write about it out of frustration. And then, of course, they did. And I carried on writing about it after that. One of the big things that really, really gets to me is how lowbrow and simplistic national media usually is. They're treating people like they're complete fools. They simplify everything. They don't educate people. They don't tell them what's going on. And then they sensationalize minor things. And so instead of talking about the big picture and the political outlook and what the problems are for governments and telling people what's really going on, they're just trying to sell product. They're just trying to get clicks on the internet. They're just trying to get people to sell advertising. And that frustrates the hell out of me too. So I spend a couple of hours every day going through all the different outlets, independent outlets, and other television companies that seem to be more level-headed, like Al Jazeera and I won't name too many because the people will take umbrage at that. But and going on YouTube and getting the feed from people in Ukraine and people in Russia as well, and looking at the other side of the coin where people think that the Russians should have done what they did and their reasoning as well, and then trying to get an objective point of view and put it up to that business sort of level audience that you get on LinkedIn. And people started to follow it. And now I get about 1.5 million views of my written work every single week. And I think it's down to trying to be objective, trying to be sensible, and trying not to get sucked into the emotional contexts that the media tend to throw at us all the time because they want to sell something rather than tell us news. Well, I got on my soapbox with that one.
No, that's it's wonderful. It's very interesting, your perspective. What are your thoughts? I often think about, in a way, how much simpler things were if before the internet, or before, now our sort of lives are all glued to the internet, and so we're drowning in a sea of information and misinformation. And how do you see this whole thing in terms of that, right? So I just personally speaking, I know people in the village I live in that they think that the Russian attack was justified, and I in that sense, overall, maybe the mainstream media has it right, because there was a country that existed, and there was a country that invaded that country, right? So I mean, it's in a way, it's physics, right? But I'm just curious, so if you take into consideration all the information and all the different sources of things that we can look at now compared to past wars, I guess in the Gulf War, we relied on what the State Department put on CNN and things like this. But this seems to be a totally different animal in that respect. What's your take?
Yeah, politics is predominantly who controls the message. In Hungary at the moment, Viktor Orban controls the message, and so you can understand why people would believe that. In the small villages and so on, and even in the towns, because maybe they're not accessing anything other than the message that's coming out on Hungarian main media channels. We see it the same in the United Kingdom, where the main media outlets try to be what they call even-handed, and so they're not putting out a strong enough moral opinion on what is actually right and wrong in these contexts. And people are flooded with information, and they don't know what to believe anymore. They don't know where to go to for what they perceive as the truth. And of course, there are different versions of the truth, but and there's a lack of critical thinking amongst the educated classes as well. They're trying to be almost nihilistic. They're not really saying this is right, this is wrong, this is where we should stand. And it's clear to most people with an objective point of view on the Iran-Russia war that Russia invaded. They hoped to take over the country in 3 days. They hoped to put in a puppet government. It wasn't NATO expansion that they were frightened of. It was democratic expansion that they were frightened of. It was democratic values, freedom of speech, rule of law that they were frightened of. And that was what was encroaching on their borders, not a military threat. And it's a simple case of right and wrong. They invaded another state. They murdered people. They murdered their way towards Kiev. They wiped out people. They killed people for no reason in Bucha. They murdered the soldiers that they captured after the Azov Steel siege and put them in a room with an explosive device and murdered them by blowing them up. And they are committing terrible war crimes every single day. And they invaded. And the only way that they can redeem themselves or begin to redeem themselves is to go home, to go back beyond their own borders and stay there, and then suffer the consequences of their actions, which are They're a pariah state now. Their economy is going to fail. Their military has already failed. It's just a question of time and us continuing to support them that is going to guarantee that this war is over with within a reasonable amount of time. It's important that the Western democracies continue to support Ukraine, to keep supplying them with arms, ammunition, welfare, and security, so that they can do the fighting and prevent our children from having to do the fighting in the future. So we should be extraordinarily grateful to the people of Ukraine for having the courage and strength to stand up the way they are.
I've been quite surprised at, sometimes maybe it's simply in word, but I've been surprised at the solidarity in Europe, right? So it seems many times, there's a lot of dissension amongst member states, but in essence, most of Europe has been behind Ukraine. What about that? Is that enough?
It's a big part of the equation, that's for sure. I mean, Brexit and the European Commission were creating issues that were weakening Europe as a united entity. There were divisions, widening gaps between them and NATO, and them and the United States, and cracks appearing all over the place. And Putin's invasion of Ukraine has bonded everybody back together against a common foe, which we needed. It's nothing binds people better than having a common enemy. And so it's backfired. It's backfired on Putin. Anything he wanted. You've got Finland and Sweden wanting to be part of NATO now. They didn't feel threatened before, but they feel threatened now. I think we'll look back in 5 years' time and say, wow, that actually bonded Europe together. It bonded NATO together. It destroyed Russia as a world power. And sad though it is that we had to pay that the Ukrainians have had to pay such a huge price for it. I think in the long-term future, we'll look back and say, it helped Europe, it helped NATO, it helped world peace.
We got another comment from a LinkedIn user out there who asks, do you think Putin will be overthrown if the head of Wagner takes over? Will it be mayhem, I think is the question.
Yeah, I think that's a difficult one. I think if the Russian military decide that it's time for him to go, then he'll have a convenient and peaceful death from cancer or something like that. If the head of Wagner thinks that he has a path to the Kremlin, I think he's wrong. I think that's a bit of scaremongering. I think the Russian people, if Putin falls, I think the Russian people will actually take courage and resist more strongly against the authoritarian regime, and maybe get Navalny out of prison, and hopefully he'll be able to get enough following to bring Russia back to the UN as a member state again.
That'd be great. Robin, what would you say your most provocative post has been, or maybe which one has there been any reaction that's been really surprising for you?
I like pushing the margins a bit. I like pushing the boundaries. I like saying things that everybody else or lots of other people are frightened to say because they're frightened of being cancelled out. So I will broach subjects like gender equality, race, and other things where they're taken, where situations that are difficult are taken to an extreme. PTSD is another one where I have said that every soldier is not a victim. There are a lot of people who claim to have problems. They claim victimhood so that they can appear to be a hero. Those are the sort of subjects that provoke a wicked response from certain parties. But at least I'm saying it because there's a lot of people out there now with opinions, but they won't say them because somebody behind them is saying, you can't say that. You're not allowed to say that. And I say, well, I am allowed to say it. It's my freedom of speech. I am allowed. I'm not allowed to incite hatred. I'm not allowed to abuse people, but I'm allowed to have an opinion. And I respect other people's opinions too. And I will not be silenced by, I will not be silenced or cancelled out by people with louder voices or louder numbers who want to bang on the wall and tell me that I don't understand what I'm talking about. I get that, but it goes with the territory. If you put your head up, you can expect to be a target sometimes.
You know, some of your experiences have made me think about, of course, I've seen some of the comments on some of your posts, and it's made me think, oh, you know, perhaps this is a Russian troll. But yeah, when it comes to, you know, sort of trolling on the internet, what are your thoughts about that, and sort of how you react?
Well, there's two kinds of trolls from my perspective. There's the troll farms that just sit there all day and wait for red flags to come up and bring up a word like Putin or Trump or anything else, or race or gender. And then they just paid to sit there all day and attack anybody that brings up those subjects in a manner that the paying client disagrees with. And then there's the coward, and the coward who sits online all day, provoking arguments, picking on people, annoying people, getting up people's noses and getting personal satisfaction out of that. And my advice for dealing with them is just block and delete. Don't engage with them. Just block and delete. Get them out of your picture. I mean, you wouldn't let them in your house, so why do you let them onto your page? And it's your page, you own it, and you don't have to put up with nonsense from abusive people. A lot of my posts about Ukraine are political, so I do get trolled and I do get attacked by hackers as well, who try to cancel me out. I have to be extremely careful about the language I use, because the second I make a mistake, they have a coordinated system of complaints that go in against me. So you have to word what you do very carefully. I always avoid bad language if I possibly can. If they're I go into my page almost politically every few hours and just disinfect it of the troll farms. And when I come across somebody who's being an obnoxious coward, then I just don't engage them. I just block and delete, and they're gone. That's the end of them. Sometimes I make a mistake. Sometimes I misinterpret it because I don't read it carefully enough. And people do come back to me and say, Robin, on Messenger, and say, Robin, what was that all about? And I go, oh, sorry about that. And I'll apologize and bring them back into the conversation. By no means perfect, and I don't get it all right. And I do enjoy somebody coming back to me and challenging me in a polite and educated and eloquent manner. But if somebody walked into my house and started swearing, I'd show them the door, and I'll show them the door on my pages as well.
Right. Hey, you mentioned PTSD not long ago, and I just wanted to share this comment with everyone out there. Adrian Logan says, Robin was kind enough to speak at a fundraiser I organized last November to raise funds for veterans with mental health issues. We raised a lot of money thanks to his generosity. So good job on that one.
Thanks, Adrian.
So yeah, this is something that you're actively involved in, right? This is a cause that you
well, I've actually been involved in a campaign for the last 7 years to stop the persecution and prosecution of British soldiers who served in Northern Ireland up to 50 years ago. And they're being used as political pawns in continuing battle between the two communities of Northern Ireland. And now, to avoid dealing with their own terrorist behaviors in the past, they focused on British soldiers and mistakes they made way back. And all these soldiers were investigated at the time and cleared by the authorities at the time. So we've spent 7 years. I've been one of four leaders of a group called the Northern Ireland Veterans Movement, and we've campaigned endlessly for 7 years and to stop this. And we've managed to get a bill through Parliament now that's having its readings in the House of Lords and should become law in the first half of this year. And it's a big bill, and it's quite complicated, but it will stop the vexatious prosecution of British soldiers. If talking about a little bit about leadership, if you can form an organization, bring together volunteers, hold it together for 7 years, put up with the knives in the back from your own side, and keep it going and achieve something and achieve your mission at the end, then you can herd cats. Then you can herd cats. And we've done that. We've done that.
Excellent. We also just got a comment from Neil Atkinson. Great interview, Robin. Keep up the great work. Thanks for arranging Drew. Good insights. Thank you, Neil. Thank you. Just to kind of take things to the promised land, could you talk a little bit about, in a way I see you as a kind of an atypical person, but maybe this is a prejudice in my mind, someone that's had all these kinds of experiences that you had and that you and somehow you've chosen to meditate upon them and to expound upon them. How did you decide to pursue your writing career?
I wrote Fighting Scared when about 15 years after I left the British Army. I think when I stopped soldiering, and I wanted to tell that story about being bullied, victimized, lonely, isolated kid who develops into a special forces soldier. When I went off and as I said, I taught children martial arts for 20 odd years, and then I broke my neck, and so I couldn't do that anymore. So I handed the business over to my oldest son, Alex, who now runs London Karate, and I had to find something else to do. So I went to UCAS and applied to go to Surrey University to do creative writing and English literature, and graduated 3 years later at the age of 59. And the first thing I learned was that nobody wants to sit next to their grandpa at school. But it was good. I got a lot from it. And then as a process of training myself and as a writer, I wrote the Wise Old Paratrooper trilogy, Words of the Wise Old Paratrooper, More Words, and Last Words of the Wise Old Paratrooper. And they were a training process for me, a fun process where I was putting short stories and some of my other works together, and teaching myself to actually write, edit, and produce books. And recently I wrote and produced, with the help of a friend, Warrior Poet, A Soldier's Songs, which is an illustrated book of 50 of my poems, which are about the experiences of life, about love and war and hate and sadness and depression and suicide and all sorts of other issues. And my colleague who helped me was Tommy Brabham, who's the illustrator, who took my photographs and turned them into works of art. And so that's my most recent product. I had cancer as well, so I can't run up mountains anymore. I can't ride bikes. I can't do a lot of things, but I've still got my fingers and I've still got my voice. I got my voice eventually. And so I can write and I can think and I can have opinions and I can educate and I can help other people. And I've recently volunteered to help in one of my local schools, introducing young people to poetry and the joys of it. And it's not dull and boring and verse. It's actually song without music. So lots to do. Change direction. Yeah.
What about that? You mentioned people not wanting to sit next to grandpa. What are your thoughts? Sometimes, I'm sort of an advanced middle-aged person myself, and I think about the potential gaps. But yeah, I do communicate with some younger people. But what about that? How do you see your ability to give back to younger generations, or how much do you think they seek out, thoughts from people like you, people like me?
Oh, I adore being with younger people, all the way down to the very bottom. I've got 4 great grandchildren, and
Congratulations.
every age is stimulating and it's fun. But I enjoy educating. I enjoy teaching. I enjoy showing people how to do stuff, and teaching them when they got it wrong, and seeing the joy in their face when they realize they can do stuff as well. And I think an awful lot of young people love the engagement and the involvement with older people if it's done in the right way. But teaching is entertaining. It's ta-da, here I am. I'm here to entertain you. I'm going to dance. I'm going to sing, and you're going to dance and sing with me. It's not standing up there and saying, write this down. Remember this. This is what you're supposed to do. This is how you pass a test. It's not. It's about enjoying learning. It's about having fun. Most kids learn their most fundamental lessons from their parents, but even more so from their slightly older peers and siblings. I mean, who did you follow down to the fishing pond? Who taught you how to swim? Who, it's usually a big brother or one of your mates, not your mum or dad. So getting people engaged and making a subject fun. When I was at school, I used to have double physics periods, which were pretty much pure math. And I hated it. It was boring as hell. If the teacher had got up there and said, who wants to fly a helicopter? Then I would have been interested. And this is what drag is. This is what lift is. This is what vectors are. This is how the helicopter gets off the ground. Then that was down to the teacher. That was down to the teacher understanding how to engage his audience and make it fun. And make it fun so that you wanted to know more about the subject, not just pass a damn test. And that's what I remember. And I get in front of a bunch of 8-year-olds and try to recall what it was that engaged me when I was 8. And when I was 8, it was turning teaching into a game, turning it into fun, turning it into and getting kids to teach one another rather than being the person who stands at the front all the time and they have to listen to what you say all the time. So it's a joy. Teaching's a joy. Writing's a joy because it enables me to impart knowledge and to teach. And even when I wrote a crazy story in the last 5 days, which I put out on social media, called Prince Henry and the Evil Trolls, which you might have seen.
Right.
And there was a deep moral story to that, which I saved to the very last chapter. So there's an educational, a teaching process, even when I'm having fun. Yeah.
I was thinking about for us outsiders. You have obviously some amazing things some amazing stories to tell us. But I'm wondering how does your family deal with having a member of the family that has done so many amazing things? Do they get tired of your stories, or how do they deal?
I think they've heard them all. But I'm just dad. I'm just grandpa. I'm just the husband. They do get friends that go, "Oh my God, is he your dad?" And yeah, he's just my dad. That's it, and that's how it should be. That's how it should be. We're the same as most families. We have disagreements, but fundamentally, right at the very bottom, we need each other. We still love each other intensely. There's nothing more important than life than family, and you build all civilized behavior beginning with your family and take it up from there. And it's so important to hold on to that. And when you do have fallouts or disagreements, then reconciliation is an important factor, and putting your pride aside. And sometimes you don't have to say sorry. You just have to give somebody a hug, especially when you're not wrong.
Right. And Robin, what about amongst your books? Which are you most proud of, and why?
I think Fighting Scared is the one I'm most proud of. Fighting Scared because it tells the story about that bullied kid and how he achieves and overcomes adversity. Warrior Poet of Soldier Songs because it's still part of that story, but it's academic in the way I've produced it. So it takes the education, 3 years of education that I got at university, and it does something with that education. The Wise Old Paratrooper books are fun books. They're designed to be left on the side or in the toilet, and picked up and put down at a moment's notice. And the coffee shop books, but they're fun, and they've got lots of little short stories and introductions to other works and maxims and missives and so on in there as well. So I'm proud of them all for different reasons. I want to write a novel this year. I also am working on a short vignette, I think is the correct word, on bullying, which I want to put out there, not in an academic or psychiatry sort of way, but in a person who's experienced it sort of manner, and give advice to people who don't even know they're being intimidating. Sometimes it's just part of their nature. So they don't realize how they're affecting other people with that. Bullying is isolation, humiliation, and intimidation. And people engage in that without realizing it sometimes.
Sounds like an excellent mission. My hat off. Robin, thanks so much for your time. And I just like to ask you if there's anything else that you would like to tell us today.
Well, I'd like a little plug for my webpage, which is robinhorsfall.com. Very easy to remember. There's no E in Horsfall. If you want to know more about me, you can find me there. Please share anything that you see from me with your friends. And I hope we get the chance to do it again. Thanks very much, Drew.
Excellent. Yeah, and I've got your website address scrolling on the bottom of the screen, and I think people can actually click on that. And right there.
Yeah, you can find it at .com, .uk, .info. They all go to the same place.
Now, are most of your books available in paper editions, or are they mostly electronic? Or
no, they're all paperbacks. They're available on Amazon as well, but you can get signed copies from my personal webpage. And I just recently released Warrior Poet as an ebook as well, which again you can find on robinhorsfall.com. It's ACX, which is an Amazon company. You can find it there. It's 51 minutes long, and it's something to pass a lunch break with, or with your earphones in. See what you think. I'd love to get feedback on that.
Excellent. Okay, Robin. Thank you so much, and I'm so glad we finally got a chance to meet here. Thanks for everyone for chiming in. Thanks for your comments, and your wonderful praise is always appreciated. This is it. Our time on Making Waves has come to an end. Thanks to everyone for tuning in, for the questions, feedback. Lovely to speak to you, wise warrior and writer, Robin Horsfall. Thank you, Robin.
Thanks, Drew.
Robin's just one of the spectacular individuals doing amazing things in a difficult world that I'm planning on continuing to interview right here on Making Waves. So, my friends, stay tuned. See you, Robin.
Bye.
Bye-bye.